City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is not only a well-known playwright, but one of America's foremost political cartoonists, Mr. Jules Feiffer. Jules, thank you for being here.
Nice to be here, Ed.
Being a political cartoonist is almost as hazardous as being a playwright. How did you get started in that?
Nothing's as hazardous as being a playwright.
Well, I said almost. I didn't say as. I didn't say it is as.
Well, I started as unhazardous a way as I could. I found the only newspaper who would run me.
Is that the Village Voice?
The Village Voice, and this is in 1956. We came to an agreement. The agreement was they'd run anything I gave them, and their part of the agreement was they wouldn't pay me. So
that was a quid pro quo, huh?
It was a quid pro quo, what the stuff was worth. But it was the first time I could get what I really wanted to say in print and not design it for a particular magazine or a particular newspaper, particular market. At that time, there were no publications really that existed in which a writer or an artist could do his work the way he wanted. He'd have to slant it to the needs of the editors, and they would slant it to the needs of what they perceived to be the market, whether it was the New Yorker or Look magazine or Esquire, whatever it was. So the Voice was the first publication that said, we trust you to do your own work. And a lot of people were happy to work for nothing just to get their own work into print. And I was one of them.
To be seen.
And to be seen. But
well, now, how long did you go on? Were you in every week?
I was in every week, and
when did they start paying you?
Not for a long. I was in syndication for. Well, the first paper to actually pay me was the Observer in London, which picked me up for 2 years after I was in The Voice, but by that time I was already appearing in Playboy, and which was paying me a lot for separate cartoons that were not syndicated or run in The Voice. So I was beginning to make some money at it, but The Voice didn't pay me for the first 8 years or so.
Really?
Yes, after they were making a lot of money, but they thought it would be an insult to me to pay me.
Well, this is really what, from your standpoint, this is what in the grocery business or they call a lost leader. I mean, you were really losing as far as any margin.
It did prepare me for 20 years in the theater. It gave me exactly the right background.
Well, before we finish that, a couple of things about that. You were then picked up, syndicated, which you still are, and are carried in well over 100 newspapers.
Yeah, and here and abroad, yeah.
Here and abroad, both.
Yeah.
Just what has that whole world changed? That when I say that world, I mean the subjects, not your.
Well, it changes by presidents. I mean, it always changes, and
is that really the sort of the key to the whole thing? Is the administration?
Well, there are two keys. One is every 4 or 8 years there's a change in administration, and the other, which is my age. So the subject matter. I mean, you don't see a lot of young men trying to make out with young girls anymore.
Which was it was a favorite theme.
You don't see a lot of that anymore. Yeah. I still dredge back into my memory to bring those up to date and try to continue that, but it's a little harder than it used to be because the autobiographical content has totally disappeared. So it's somehow or other you're dealing with the problems of 50-year-olders and 60-year-olds.
Instead of much younger. Well, what about I would guess that in addition to there's one third factor that occurs to me, which are those external events like the Vietnam War or the Gulf War, things like that. That also would influence you as well.
Of course, yeah. The politics of the moment, and as awful as those events may be, and it's a cliche for the political cartoons to say the worse times are, the better it is for you. Those are pure gold. I mean, the 8 years of Ronald Reagan for a guy like me were pure gold. He was my muse. I mean, it was just simply wonderful.
You had a great target, in other words. Yeah.
George Bush is much harder because he's pure mush, but mush itself can be interesting. And I mean, people love to beat Bush up because he's this inflatable balloon that you can keep hitting. But
Reagan was even easier though for you. You had a book actually called Ronald Reagan in Movie America.
That's right. Well, Reagan was wonderful for me because as someone on the left, to finally meet somebody in office who was a true ideologue of the right. and who wasn't a pragmatist, or who wasn't a weasel, or wasn't a slickster who trimmed his politics to whatever the polls demanded, but in fact believed in something, and what he believed was diametrically opposed to what I believed. It was marvelous to be able to go into combat against someone like that, and to do strips that dealt with the moral and political nature of the American experiment. That was great stuff. I mean, I had a lot of fun with that. The worse things got, as I say.
The better they got.
But
the more pointed they got.
Yes,
the sharper
yes.
they were able to
And
get.
it's not as if, subsequent administrations can't be fun either, but we'll never have an ideologue like Reagan, I mean, God willing, but...
with quite that sort of, well, I won't say tunnel vision, but that kind of focused vision.
Plus the movie stuff, plus the fact that he could come on as Jimmy Stewart in the Frank Capra movie, but he was really on the side of the mean banker. He sounded like Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, but he was really using the lines of Lionel Barrymore. And that was what the flummery was. And it was, and it was a very engaging and an effective flummery. It worked.
So how did you get, when did you first have the urge, or were you first attracted by the notion of getting involved with the theater?
Never. Never. Never.
But
ever.
Did you come in it sideways?
To the back door. I was always too smart to go into theater. I mean, I had loved theater, gone to plays all my life, and known from the results of those plays that the plays that I went to in previews that I thought were wonderful were the plays that closed in a week and a half, and the plays that were the hits were the ones I walked out on. So,
so you knew you weren't in touch with
I knew that I was a little... I knew that if I ever made the mistake of getting into the theater and wrote a play that I really liked and I thought had some value, would probably close in a week. And I was enough of a masochist in terms of the comic strip. I didn't need any more luck like that. But what happened was, well, what really happened was the Kennedy assassination happened to me. And following that, the shooting of Oswald by Ruby gave me a feeling about this country I had never had before, and that was that we were, I mean, it seemed to me that those two acts were indicative of something under the surface that had erupted that was telling me about a sickness in the system that I called at the time a national nervous breakdown. And I didn't see anybody commenting on it in any form, and I tried to do it in the strip, and I couldn't, and I just went into this long depression, and I knew I had to write in some long form to say what I thought was going on.
Excuse me 1 second. Why couldn't you do it in the strip?
Because what I had to say and the atmosphere I had to create would take more than 6 or 8 panels, which is what the cartoon, because of space limitations.
So it was just a question of the space.
Yes.
Right.
So I started work on this as a novel, and I worked on it for 2 years on this idea, and it got nowhere because I was a lousy novelist. And in desperation, I went up to this writers and artists community in Saratoga Springs, Yaddo, to try and go through all this material, and decided really more against my will than anything else that I'd better try dramatizing it or throw it out, because I had no other forms to try. And as soon as I began to writing it in play form, and of course it was Little Murders, that I knew that hit or miss, success or failure, masochism or not, I was stuck. I just loved the form. And not only did I love it, I found that I could actually do it. And that when a scene wasn't going well, rather than depress me, it excited me because it gave me a chance to try to figure out why it wasn't going. I mean, I was just fascinated by building long scenes, which I had never done before. I mean, moving out of the confinement of the strip, where you have 2 characters, at most 3, engaged in usually dialogues of alienation.
Right.
Here I could begin, move through the alienation, move on to something else, and then see where that took you. So the ambitiousness of it all excited me. The idea of writing dialogue for characters who spoke differently and could be identified in different ways by the way they sounded. The cribbing from my life and other people's lives. I mean, just all of that I found immensely, well, really thrilling was the word, and I've never had as good a time.
After you finished the script, what happened?
This is quite perverse. I had, having made the mistake of reading you guys for years.
Yes. Meaning the critics.
The critics, yeah. what I recognized, this is true, I swear it.
I believe you.
I remember all those reviews that said, and these were endemic, that the first act or the first two acts of so-and-so's plays are wonderful, it falls apart in the third act. What a shame, it doesn't carry through. I figured I was going to beat that system. I wrote the third act first. Because I knew what was going to happen. So I wrote the third act, then I wrote the first two. I took it home, gave it to my wife to read, my first wife. She read it and she said, I love the first two acts. You got trouble with the third act.
So you couldn't beat it.
Couldn't beat the system. So I went back, rewrote, and once I had it, I let it out to my agent, Robert Lance, who was not my agent at that time because I was not, but he was my friend and still is. But I knew no one else to take it to, and he gave it to Alexander Cohn, and the rest is history, however dismal.
As I recall, it was produced on Broadway.
It was produced on Broadway.
And it became one of those, and did not last very long on Broadway.
7 performances.
Yes, but became a legend in its own time because it was then done again off Broadway at the Circle.
Well, it had an enormous, even before then, it was, I mean, the original production, for all sorts of reasons, was rather a mess. And a lot of that was my fault, and a lot of it was other people's. But whatever it just didn't come together. Enough of the play, nonetheless, came through to create a lot of excitement among audiences and among other playwrights before it opened. You know, and you could feel it in the. And I got the feedback, so I knew that I was in business even if I was out of business. I mean, I knew that I had written a good play. Right. I expected the reviews to be as bad as they were. I would have written a bad review for that. You know, I mean, Do
you mean because of the production? Of the
yes, because it was, I mean, what was awful is the last preview, and the critics were still coming to opening nights at that time. The last preview, there was a new director in. He had pulled the thing into shape. I mean, we replaced directors, and actors didn't know what they were doing. And the last preview simply was sensational. It was I mean, the audience went nuts. I went nuts. It was the play I had written. It was the first time I'd seen it, the way I had imagined it. I was thrilled, but I was also terribly distressed because I knew that they couldn't do it 2 nights in a row. And the next night, the critics were coming. And I knew that there had to be a letdown because this was just way over the top. And the next night was a dreadful performance, and I expected the reviews. And as I say, they were not unwarranted. You know,
it hadn't had time then to set in terms of what happened on that last preview.
It might have taken 6 months.
Well, but Alan Alda now directed it, right?
No, Alan Arkin.
I mean, Alan Arkin directed it.
The revival.
Alan Arkin directed the revival
at the American Place.
Yeah, American Place, and that was a success.
That was a wonderful production.
Because that went on and on. I mean,
well, when Alan first called me and told me he wanted to do this, I said, I've only got one rule: don't consult me on casting. Because I was all wrong with Little Murders, and just do it without me. And you know, I'll come in. You know, if you need questions answered, I'll answer them. And I'll come to the run-throughs and previews and help you there. But I don't think I'll be of any help in rehearsal because I sure as hell wasn't the first time around.
So you stayed away.
I stayed away, and it was a very smart decision.
And did he give you, and the cast give you what you wanted?
Well, you know, he called me up and he gave me the names. He said Vince Gardenia. I said that's a very bad idea. Linda Lavin, that's a terrible idea. Elizabeth Wilson, all wrong. You know, it's the same thing I did with Mike Nichols on Carnal Knowledge. You know, that I can cast my friends' plays. I can't cast mine. And every one of these people was wonderful. I mean, every single one of them was right. You know, well,
maybe that's why he was a director and you were a playwright.
Well, you know, one of the few people who was right in the original production of Little Murders was Elliot Gould, who wasn't my idea.
Right. So then, well now, and when did the White House Murders? That came along not too long after that.
I came about 3 years after. I wrote, the next play I wrote was a play called God Bless, which was done at Yale when Brustein was there at the Yale Rep, and then at the Royal Shakespeare Company's Theater, the Old Witch, which also, the Old Witch was, the RSC was responsible really for bringing back Little Murders, because after it flopped in New York, they immediately went into production with it, and it was a big hit in London and won some prizes. Which, and you know, in those years...
This was before the Alan Arkin production.
Yes, well, in those years, if they like you in England, then maybe they were wrong in the United States. You know, so it helped prepare the way for producers to be interested in the play in a revival over here. We did God Bless over in London and at the Yale Rep, not a very good play and not very good productions. And then, and it was a political play, but it was more of a cartoon and not a very good one. I had some good things in it, but it really didn't come together. And, but it did teach me how to write a political play, I thought. And so the next political play was the White House murder case. But before that, I wrote Carnal Knowledge. But
Now,
Carnal Knowledge was never done as a play. It was until years later. It was
I was
done
going to
as a
say,
film.
it seems to me that didn't Ted Swindley direct the original stage version of that a year or so ago?
A little longer than that.
Well,
but
whatever,
yeah,
as a stage play.
Yes, he called me years after the movie came out. Ted Swindley, someone I never heard of, called me from a theater in Houston, a theater I never heard of, called The Stages, and said he had read the screenplay and he thought that was actable on stage, and would I consider that? Had I ever considered it? And I said, actually, it was originally a play, and that screenplay is an adaptation of the play, and would you like to see the play? So I sent it to him, and he loved it, and we put it on. I mean, he brought me down there to check out the casting. And in New York, you just cast forever, audition after audition, and can't quite find the right people. We found the right people in one day there, just from local actors who were all wonderful. I mean, it was just, I don't know, you know, from his own rep company.
Right.
And they were terrific. And then I went through the business, as you do for a new play, where I had to make cuts. I mean, you work on it and shape it and do all the stuff that, and what ended up was some mix between the script that I finally gave Mike Nichols for the movie and the script I had originally written with some new changes.
Right.
But it was a wonderful production.
That's
it
great.
was just
So
one of the best productions I've ever had.
Well, now let's go back then to the idea of that. How did you show Mike Nichols the play, or how did the movie come about of Carnal Knowledge?
I offered it. Mike and I had known each other for many years, been friends for, you know, since the days of Mike and Elaine. And I offered the play to him.
As a play?
As a play. And he called me up a day or so later, and he said, I love it. I don't want to do it as a play. I want to do it as a movie. This was right after he had finished The Graduate and was then shooting, or then editing Catch-22.
Right.
So I thought about it for 30 seconds and said yes.
And did he want you? He wanted you to write the
Oh
screen
yes,
version.
yes. I mean, there was no. We would, and he was the best editor I've ever worked with. You know, in any line of work. I mean, he was just he's just glorious to work with on script. He and John Madden are two absolutely precise people in terms of helping a writer.
Tell me because I think people would be interested in hearing what from a writer's standpoint constitutes a helpful and editor.
What Mike did on Carnal Knowledge was get me into a conversation, which had I not known he loved the piece and was going to direct it, I might have thought was hostile, because he made me defend from the first scene every line virtually. Why does he say this? Why does he reply that? Why is this happening? Why is that? And
he questioned everything.
He questioned everything, and I realized afterwards this was the way, one, for him to learn how to direct it, to know what I had in mind, and two, this was his way of figuring out what was extraneous and what was unnecessary, and it helped me. I found myself discovering reasons why I did certain things that I didn't know,
Right.
you know, until after I had made up the reasons and discovered they were true.
Would you then, as a result of those conversations and those challenges on his part, would you sometimes add things that you had learned to help bolster or justify?
More often cut, because
and
one
then,
thing, because it's a movie, and,
Right.
and there's a lot of theater-sized dialogue in the script, which just doesn't work on film. With film, it's much more intimate and close-up, and it just seems a little speechy. While on the stage, you know, one hopes it doesn't sound speechy, but sounds natural. You know,
Yes.
what passes for naturalism on the stage seems phony as hell, you know, in film.
Sure.
So a lot of that went, and but in addition, trying to take speeches or scenes that were very talky and find visual metaphors for them, so that one whole scene was taken out and replaced by a scene that people remember a lot, that takes place in the bar. and there's a dance scene, a dance sequence between Candice Bergen and Artie Garfunkel and Jack Nicholson, and little things, nothing major, but bit by bit by bit, it becomes major and shapes the film and makes it a movie rather than a script of a play that's filmed.
You obviously then, this was a great lesson for you. I mean, a great teaching experience for you in terms of how to fashion either a film script or a play script.
Well, you know, what's so interesting about becoming a playwright at a late age, because I really didn't, I was in my late 30s by the time Little Murders was written, was that by that time I had learned, for good or bad, all there was for me to know about the cartoon. I mean, I was the master of my form. And I could get better at it incrementally, and the drawing certainly changed over the years after that. But in terms of writing it, there wasn't a lot more for me to learn, or I didn't think so. So it was marvelous to go in as a kid, as a neophyte, close to 40, into a new business, a new profession, and start learning the craft and start dealing with my own ignorance and go on that voyage of discovery, which is terribly exciting. You know, where one day you can't do it, you can't write a convincing scene with 4 people. You can do 2 people.
Right.
And then a week later, suddenly you can do it, and you can do it with 6 or 7, and you don't know how that happened, and where they all have their own voices. And it was marvelous to learn and keep learning, and I feel I'm still, that's still happening to this day, if not in theater, then in other forms.
I just happened to think about something. You're talking about this process. I saw recently a cartoon that was half drawn by you and half by Linda Barry.
That's right.
Who has become a playwright with, what does he call, Let the Good Times?
No, oh dear.
Doesn't make any difference. Anyway, she was writing her half, I mean, drawing and writing her half, and you all were having a dialogue.
This was her first play.
Right.
And the Times called me up and asked me if I would interview her for the paper or write an article about it, because I love her work. And I said I didn't have the time, but what if the 2 of us did a joint strip, where me as the wizened old, beaten-up theater hand who's a cartoonist talked to this young cartoonist going into the theater for the first time, warning her about all of the problems and drawbacks, and she's just full of beans, which was truly reflective of our editors.
I was going to say that what was reflected in that was your character. Was saying that this is it's really torture, and
she would say, "What a ball!"
And it's great. But she was saying that this is really all for me. I mean, they're saying my words, and they're doing all of this, and I'm enjoying it. And she was not facing opening night yet. She thought it was all kind of.
She loved it, and she got marvelous response to it. She got a wonderful production.
Yes.
And it looked terrific.
The Good Times Are Killing Me.
That's right. Exactly right.
The Good Times.
I was just testing you. I knew that.
But now, how truthful was your character in there, complaining about the fact that you have no control over the way things are said, and about the fact that you have to revise and revise and revise, which you don't, I mean, if you revise a cartoon, it's for your own reasons.
Yeah, it's both true and untrue. In fact, I have a wonderful time. I mean, it really depends on who you're working with, and I've been fortunate for most of my career. There are a couple of exceptions, but more than I think most playwrights, in dealing with people I liked. I think for me, anyhow, the key has always been the director. And
Mike Nichols did Elliot Loves, which was
Nichols did
a
Loves,
play that was on a couple of years ago.
A couple of years ago for a couple of minutes. But nonetheless, it was the best time I've ever had in the theater, with a wonderful company. And there's not a moment of that of that process leading up to the disaster that followed that I didn't treasure. And I treasure the memory of the production. We had a wonderful time. Everybody had a wonderful time, and it was. I mean, I was going to say a little like a party, but that's frivolous because we worked very hard. A working party, because you were always learning, and everybody was teaching everybody else, and it was intense, but it was fun, and for a playwright, at one point, I was sitting in the theater, which was the Promenade, while everything was being flown in. They were putting up the sets and putting a turntable, and I see all these workmen, and I think this Walter Mitty, Thurber-like dream of, my God, I sat down and wrote some lines in longhand on a piece of paper, And these guys, you know, I had
They're
three
doing
lines.
it all for me.
I had three lines about the set, and $20,000 later.
And all these workers.
Yeah, that's right.
Assembling this.
All these jobs, all of this, because of what you write on a piece of paper, and it just seemed wondrous to me. It still does, you know, and I love that process.
Have you? This would be a different experience. Your plays being done in regional theaters or theaters around the country.
Well, it isn't that. It's only different in. I mean, New York is a dreadful place to put on plays because you can't get away from the tension about success and failure. New York is only about success and failure. I mean, it's where the heart has gone out of not just theater but other aspects of culture, and why in some ways it's become a remote and protective and unpleasant town in certain areas. But you get out in regional theaters, example, you know, in Houston,
Right.
or at the Mark Taper where we did Grown Ups. You get into other theaters around the country, and that kind of pressure, while it still exists in a small way, isn't there. You're just doing the work, and you hope the work will be well received. But you're doing it, and you try to do that in New York too. But always there's that.
There are these other things at
that
work.
overlay. You know, how much money it costs, the budget.
How will it be received?
How will it be received? Because New York is the only theater city, major theater city in the world that I know of that is totally critic controlled. I mean, there's no trade-off. You know, that either the New York Times likes you, and it really doesn't matter what the other people say to that extent. If you're not approved by the New York Times, you're dead. So it's not really about theater; it's about a lottery. You know,
yes.
And so you go in. If you go in, and I've stopped for that reason. I'm not going to do it anymore. But you go in.
Would you always now do it in a place like the Mark Taper where Grown Ups was done, or
something like that? If I write, you know, but I'm a New Yorker, so you know the heart has gone out of writing plays if I can't write them for my own town, and
Right.
I can't.
Right.
But, you know, because I just don't approve of the lottery system. So I do other things, which I also get great pleasure out of. But I miss that process which I just described. The sense of, I mean, it's a real adventure, far more so than, say, working on a film, which can also have its rewards, but it's not that hands-on direct.
Right. And there's not the same kind of camaraderie. I mean, there is.
No,
There
no.
is in certain isolated ways. But
theater is a true collaboration. Movies are a collaboration in the sense that the director is talking to himself, and then when he finishes that conversation, he
starts another one.
He tells the writer what he wants.
And so it's a series of separate conversations
That's right.
instead of one.
But there's a real division, equal division of power in the theater that happens under, you know, the good circumstances in a generous.
Couldn't you write a play about New York that was just first performed somewhere else?
Oh, I could, but look, I mean, I love regional theater. I love to work there. But I've got a 7-year-old child. I'm very homebound, and I mean, if I
So
wanted,
it's really just personal circumstances.
yes, you know what's important to me is to be around my family and not to be. I would love to do a play somewhere at the Seattle Rep and all of it. I just can't see being away for 2 months.
On this notion of staying at home, our time has run out. I hate to tell you, so you can leave and run home here. Thanks.
Thank you.
My guest has been Jules Feiffer, and this has been Spotlight. Thank you for being with us.